Hello everyone, my name is Brennan Hardy. Today I will be offering a general guideline towards completing a successful 1020 hookup for standard polysomnography. As a general overview, we will first be discussing what exactly the International 1020 system for polysomnography is, where it is derived from, and how to perform the patient hookup process. A description of the exact percentages that are implemented to uncover electrode placement sites will follow. Next, a guided video will be shown that demonstrates the correct application of the system, including proper measurement for EEG electrode placement on top of the patient's head. So we first begin with the simple question: what is the 1020 system, and where is this name derived from? This concept was initially developed by Dr. Herbert H. Jasper in 1949, so it has obviously withstood the test of time. 4 anatomical landmarks are located and implemented to aid in the measurement process: the Nasion, which is essentially the bridge of the nose, the Inion, or the occipital protuberance in the back of the head, and both the left and right preauricular points, which can be located directly in front of the notch in the middle of the ear. A measurement from the bridge of the nose to the back of the head, or Nasion to Inion, is made. An additional measurement is made between both the left and right preauricular points. In doing so, the majority of the sites where electrodes are placed for a standard polysomnogram are established via 10% and 20% of these two measurements made, hence the name 1020 system. For standard polysomnograms, only 6 electrode placement sites are utilized for exploring electrodes, which are the electrodes that will be utilized to detect and monitor the electrical activity of the brain. These exploring electrodes are of occipital, central, and frontal lobe derivation. There are 2 for each lobe, and they are known as F3, F4, C3, C4, and O1, O2. More of this will come later. Of note, it is vital to have a standard system for measuring these electrode placement sites in order to ensure an optimal monitoring of brain activity across the spectrum of all patients. Every individual is special in their genetic makeup, and this also correlates to various sizes and shapes of heads. This standard system of measurement safeguards the consistency of accurate recordings of brain activity from one patient's head to another. To serve as a simplified example prior to the instructional video, these 4 important anatomical landmarks are shown in this slide in a top-down bird's eye view, as if you were looking down at this individual's scalp. The Inion can also be observed as the external protuberance at the base of one's skull. We will use these 4 distinct landmarks to identify the proper positioning for our 6 exploring electrodes. Another example that is significant to note prior to observing the instructional videos is a top-down viewpoint of the 6 exploring electrode placement sites that the measurements through using the 1020 system will allow us to locate. These are F3, F4, C3, C4, O1, and O2. Also observe how even derivations such as O2 are positioned right of center, whereas odd-numbered derivations such as O1 are placed left of center. Through these 6 exploring electrodes, a standard polysomnogram is able to be performed. The other sites that are noted within this diagram, FP1, FPZ, FP2, F7, F8, FZ, CZ, and OZ, don't measure any electrical activity during a standard polysomnogram themselves. However, their positions are vital to locating the 6 exploring electrodes that are needed for the monitoring of brain activity. Refer back to this diagram in the following video presentations for guidance throughout these 6 necessary steps. What follows are the 6 steps to completing a standard polysomnogram hookup through utilizing the 1020 system. Each following step after step number 1 will be preceded by a corresponding video, and the slides will serve as a brief review. First, we will locate our 4 anatomical landmarks.
Alright guys, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to perform the standard 1020 system for polysomnography hookup. So, like I said before, those 4 anatomical landmarks are imperative to locate before starting your measurements. So first thing, we have our Nasion, which is essentially the bridge of the nose. And then we have the Inion, which is at the back of the head. It's also known as the occipital protuberance. You could feel it on the back of your own head. It's where the skull kind of protrudes from the head, but you can't really see it real well on this mannequin. And then we have our left and right preauricular sites, which is essentially the notch right in front of the middle of the ear. So once we locate those 4 anatomical landmarks, we are ready to go ahead and begin our measurements. Okay, so to start, the one measurement that you want to start with is measuring from the nasion, which is the bridge of the nose, to the Inion, which is that occipital protuberance. So once we do that, and it's easier to measure in centimeters, not inches, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So we have 38 inches as the measurement from the nasion to the Inion. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure half of that distance. Half of 38 is 19. So 19 is going to be our first marking for CZ at the top of the head. And then what we also want to do from the nasion to the Inion is we want to measure 10% of that distance up from the nasion and up from the Inion. So 10% of 38 centimeters is 3.8 centimeters. So we're going to go ahead and do this in the front and the back. So 3.8 right here, and then in the back, 2, 3, 3.8 right here. And then last thing that we want to do is we want to measure 20% down from the mark that we made at the top of the head. So 20% of 38 centimeters is 7.6 centimeters. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So 7.6, marking's going to go right there.
So to serve as a brief review, the second step is to measure from the nasion to Inion and make subsequent markings as indicated in the previous video. The measurements used in the video are shown as an example in parentheses and bolded.
Okay, so after those couple measurements, what we then want to do is focus on our 2 other anatomical landmarks, which are the left and the right preauricular sites. So we're going to go ahead and do that from the notch in the middle of the ear on the right side to the left side. And here we have the same thing, 38 inches, because this is a mannequin and it's a perfect head. So we're going to do the same thing at the top, measure halfway, which would be, again, 19 inches. So we're going to intersect right there. And then what we're going to do is, same thing, 10% up from the left and right preauricular sites, the same thing that we did from 10% up above the nasion and 10% up above the Inion. So again, 10% of 38 centimeters is 3.8. So we're going to go ahead and do that. 1, 2, 3, 3.8. Marked right there. And then again on this side, 3.8, which will be about right there. Okay, and then the last measurements that we're going to do is we're going to measure, again, like we did 20% down from the nasion to the Inion. We're going to do 20% of that measurement down the sides of the head. So again, that's 7.6 centimeters, 20% of 38 centimeters. So we're going to measure 7.6 It's going to be right there. And the same thing on this side of the head. Okay, I'm going to just turn it this way so you guys can see. Again, 20%, 7.6 centimeters. So it's just going to be right there. Okay.
To review, in a similar fashion to the Nasion to Inion measurement, you should measure between the left and right preauricular points as well.
Okay, so now that we have our measurements from Nasion to Inion and from the left and right preauricular sites, we're going to go ahead and measure the circumference of the head through the areas where we marked up 10% or 3.8 centimeters. So that's going to be FPZ, that's going to be T3, OZ, and T4. We're going to mark the circumference through. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now that we have the entirety of the circumference of the head, which is 55 centimeters, what we're going to do is we're going to find the last measurement to finalize OZ back in the head. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, get the circumference of the head again, which was 55 centimeters. And then halfway, which is 27.5 centimeters, is going to be our mark where we're going to place OZ. So we're going to go ahead and mark right here. It's right there. So that's our OZ. Now what we're going to do, again, with that 55 centimeter measurement of the circumference of the head, is 5% of that, which is 2.75 inches. We're going to measure to the left and to the right of FPZ to get FP1 and FP2. So we're going to go ahead and do that. 2.75 inches. So that's going to be FP1, and then 2.75 inches over to the right is going to be FP2. So that's FP1 and FP2, and we're going to do the same thing at the back of the head to get O1 and O2. Alright, and again for O1. And then last thing that we're going to do with the circumference of the head is we're going to measure 10% more over from FP1 and FP2 to get markings for F7 and F8. So 10% to the left of FP1 is going to get us our marking for F7. 10% of that circumference of the head, which is again 55 centimeters, is 5.5 centimeters. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then the same thing for FP2, which is going to get us our marking for F8. Okay, so now we have preliminary markings for O1, O2, C3, and C4, and then the last two exploring electrodes that we're trying to find here is going to be F3 and F4 for the frontal lobes, which are going to be in the front of the head.
After the Nasion to Inion and left to right preauricular measurements are made, a head circumference measurement should be made next as the fourth step.
Okay, so now we're going to complete our markings for C3, C4, and O1, O2 in the back of the head. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to measure from FP1 all the way back to O1 through this marking that we made for C3. And then the same thing on the right side, we're going to measure from FP2 all the way back to O2 through this marking here for C4. So we're going to go ahead and start with that on the left side. We get 26 inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure halfway between, which would be 13 centimeters, not inches, I apologize. So what we're going to do is right here at 13, we're going to make our mark, and that's going to complete our marking for C3. And then at 26 inches, we're going to make a mark. So now we're going to do the same thing on the right side of the head. So we're going to measure from FP2 through C4 all the way back to O2. So it should be the same measurement. So it's going to be 13 because it's 26. So that's going to be our marking for C4. And right here we have 26. So we're going to make our marking there. So now we have finished our markings for O1, O2, and C4 and C3.
Step number 5 is needed to get the exact locations for 4 out of 6 of the needed exploring electrodes. So a measurement from FP1 to O1 and FP2 to O2 are made. Next, the final 2 exploring electrodes that are required to be located are F3 and F4, the frontal lobe derivations.
After getting our 2 O's and our 2 C's, the final 2 exploring electrodes are our F's. So the markings that we made for F7 and F8, we're going to measure through our marking that we made for FZ, and it comes to 24 centimeters. So we're going to measure halfway, which is 12 centimeters, to get our final marking for FZ. And then what we're going to do is we're going to measure 25% of that 24 centimeter measurement to get our marking for F3 and F4. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So 6 up. And we're going to do 6 down, which is going to be 18. And that's our 2 markings for F4 and F3. Okay, so the final measurements that we have to make for our F's is going to be the same thing. FP1 through back to O2, or O1, and FP2 back through to O2. So we know the measurement or the distance between our FP's and our C's is 13 centimeters. So what we have to do is we just measure halfway between that distance, which is 6.5 centimeters. And that's going to give us our final crossing mark through for our F's. So right there is going to be our mark for F3, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. 6.5 up. Alright, so that about summarizes the 1020 system for polysomnography hookup. I hope that you guys were able to get a better visualization of how this process works to get our 6 exploring electrodes that are utilized for standard polysomnography. Our O's, C's, and F's.
So finally we come to step number 6, which is the final step, where a measurement from F7 to F8 through Fz will give us the exact positioning for the frontal derivations, F3, F4, and also Fz. So now that all 6 exploring electrode locations are known, the EEG electrodes can be placed in the correct regions for their accurate monitoring of brainwave activity. To conclude, I think it was important to end with yet another diagram, as direct visualization of where these electrodes are placed is key to actually learning their appropriate positions via measurement. In a standard polysomnogram, again, only 6 exploring electrodes are utilized for brainwave monitoring purposes, and these are the electrodes that we located today. However, according to Spriggs, as many as 256 electrode sites can be used for a full head EEG hookup. Therefore, the International 1020 system can and should be viewed as the foundation of all EEG measurement systems. In order to understand and complete a proper full head EEG hookup, one must first begin with the International 1020 system for standard polysomnography. What follows are my references that were utilized throughout this project. I hope that you have learned something valuable as it pertains to the standard polysomnogram hookup, and I thank you so much for listening.